Well, let's speak to commentator and former Downing Street advisor Tim Montgomerie to get his take on exactly what the issue seems to be. Because I think most people understand there is an issue in number 10 right now.
Absolutely, and I think there's been an issue for a long time, Tom. My period inside Downing Street was a very brief one, but I got to know Boris Johnson very well over a series of meetings over a number of years beforehand. And what was clear is that Boris does need someone who is a truth teller around him, someone who will stand up to him in a way that people who don't know him that well, are reluctant to do so. And I was particularly impressed by the role that his former wife, Marina Wheeler, played in his life. She was the rock, really, around which and his life was built. And I think her absence from that sort of truth-telling role is particularly significant. And, of course, by the nature of it, very difficult to replace.
So, in some respects, in your view, this is more of a personal issue than a political one?
In large part, I think that's absolutely right. We all know that there is Boris's personal life is colourful, without going into all of the details. And we also know that when he was mayor of London, he had a very powerful sort of right-hand man, Simon Milton, the former leader of Westminster City Council, who sadly died very prematurely. And there's always been that really significant person alongside Boris, someone who he trusts, but someone who will stand up to him and sort of correct his weaknesses. And I think it's the absence of that person that is particularly acute at the moment. It's nearly 2 years ago, though, that I proposed to the Prime Minister that he introduce someone who perhaps a former Chief of Staff from the White House or a former head of the Australian Prime Minister's office to conduct a thoroughgoing review of the Downing Street operation. Have a look at it from first principles to see how, in the 21st century, with all the complexities of modern government, his office could be run. And he seemed keen on the idea, but never actually acted on it. And I think that also is a lack. There's a haphazard construction to the team around him that means that the problem I diagnosed at the beginning of that absence of that one sort of strong continuous figure is only exacerbated.
And there seem to be a number of power bases in number 10 as well, one clustering around the Prime Minister's wife, Carrie Johnson, and one clustering around Dan Rosenfield. Which do you think is winning out?
I don't know, really. I'm probably not close enough to it now. Probably, I would say, looking from the outside, as all of your viewers are doing as well, Tom, is I would conclude that no one is really winning out, because if someone was really in the ascendancy, you would probably get some sort of continuity of approach. That one faction would be seeing its methods and its objectives coming through more than any other. I don't see that pattern of continuity from Downing Street at all at the moment, and I think that is the primary weakness. I think a common factor amongst all of the factions, though, that are currently there is just the lack of experience. They're all quite young, and I think perhaps some addition of grey power, if you like, people who've been round the block once or twice would be welcome, not just inside number 10 Downing Street, but around the cabinet table as well. There are a lot of ministers on the Tory backbenches who I think could add some firepower to the cabinet, but currently aren't being used.
I always wonder how much the cabinet actually is able to change all that much. It seems to be these days much more of a rubber stamping body than the advisers, of course, the unelected advisers within number 10. Boris Johnson, of course, lost Steady Eddie, Sir Eddie Lister, his senior adviser that was with him throughout his mayoralty and also early premiership. Recently, there's also been another very high-profile departure around this time last year, of course, of Dominic Cummings. I wonder, to what extent has that changed the dynamics within number 10 in your view?
I think there are obviously significant figures. Eddie Lister, who was the person who replaced Simon Milton at Boris's right hand when he was mayor of London, didn't particularly want to come out of retirement, but Boris really encouraged him to come into 10 Downing Street. But I don't think he was ever really fully committed to the role. And when you are chief of staff to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, you really do have to be prepared to run at 100 miles per hour just to keep on top of things. And I don't think Eddie Lister's heart really was in doing that. So always there's been that sort of that essential role, a chief of staff in Downing Street, someone who has the Prime Minister's ear and who people know has the Prime Minister's ear, really is someone who's seen in charge. There's never been that person alongside Boris Johnson. It was, of course, briefly Dominic Cummings, but even he was beset by factions as well. And he didn't really undertake that other important role that a good chief of staff would undertake and listen to people. It was very much for Dominic Cummings his way or no way, and he really sort of didn't listen to alternative sources of wisdom. And when you are running something as complex as a government of a Western state as advanced as Britain, you need to listen to alternative sources of wisdom. And although Dominic Cummings was brilliant in many ways, and the British Conservative Party owes him a lot for some of his insights into how to win Brexit, get Brexit across the line, how to win the 2019 general election. He should always been part of a team rather than head of a team. And so that search for an assertive, knowledgeable chief of staff to really to be a counterweight to the Prime Minister's weaknesses, that search of that person is still not complete in Boris Johnson's case.
Really, really interesting how there doesn't seem to be that sort of counterweight there at the top at the moment. Just finally in this conversation, Tim, is this normal? Is this to be expected? We're 2 years into a government. This is the definition of mid-term. And the Tories, yes, they're behind in the polls, but not by all that much.
Well, look, if you are worried about whether the Conservatives can win the next general election, I think the chances of the Conservatives winning the next election are still incredibly good. There are a number of structural factors, including Labour's failure to make any real advances in Scotland. I think there are various cultural war issues, for want of a better expression, particularly about what kids are being taught in schools, that I think the Conservative Party can use to their advantage incredibly well at the next general election. And so as a Conservative supporter, I'm optimistic about Conservative chances. If, however, your primary concern is this country being well governed at the moment? Is the Conservative Party making use of a once-in-a-generation opportunity to use a majority of 80 to change the nature of the country, to ensure that reforms are made that make us more competitive, that our children are better taught, etc., 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 then I think you have to be very gloomy. The government isn't using its time in office well. It isn't drafting legislation well. It is U-turning constantly. It is not a government with a strategic or a composed sense of direction. And that, I'm afraid, is what it badly needs to be corrected. And I see little immediate prospect of it being so.